From a small Midwestern town to the top of the Billboard charts, Del Shannon's story is one of wild ambition, genre-shaping creativity, and heartbreaking tragedy. He was the young guitarist who dared to fuse classic rockabilly with futuristic sounds, launching Runaway into a global phenomenon. But behind the soaring falsettos and million-selling singles lay a man wrestling with demons that fame couldn't conquer. In this video, discover how Del Shannon's meteoric rise transformed rock and roll forever, and how his personal struggles gave his music an emotional edge that still resonates today. If you're ready for the untold drama behind one of the 1960s most compelling voices, you've come to the right place. His given name was Charles Westover, born in 1934 to Bert and Leon, a couple who navigated farm life and small-town realities with the kind of grit that defined many Midwestern families at the time. He grew up in Coopersville, Michigan, a small rural pocket that felt light years away from the cultural hubs of New York or Los Angeles. Yet that was where the early spark of his musical talent quietly took root. He was the kid who tinkered with a ukulele, strummed on a guitar his mother had shown him how to hold, and let himself sink into the gentle melodies of Hank Williams or the mesmerizing falsetto of the Ink Spots. Music, even then, was more than just background noise. It felt like his secret portal to something bigger. He finished high school with that vague sense that many small-town teenagers have, the feeling that there had to be more out there. Still, necessity demanded that he work whatever odd jobs he could find, selling carpets, driving a truck, anything to put food on the table and keep a roof over his head. Life in Coopersville didn't exactly pave the road to stardom. It was easy to get stuck. Yet there was always a guitar nearby, always the notion that if he strummed a certain chord progression a certain way, something magical might happen. He just hadn't found the right opportunity. In 1954, the Army called him up. Many young men saw the draft as a disruption of whatever plans they had, but for Charles, it led to an unexpected chance to flex his musical muscles. Stationed in Germany, he joined a group called the Cool Flames and spent free evenings rehearsing rock and R&B covers in cramped military barracks. The adrenaline rush of performing before fellow soldiers, hearing applause or whistles, gave him the first real taste of what it meant to be on stage. It might not have been Madison Square Garden, but it was an audience, and it was enough. He spent his service honing not only his guitar chops, but also a stage persona, part showman, part shy kid next door, still learning to stand confidently under a spotlight. Returning to Battle Creek, Michigan in 1956 was a harsh dose of reality. He picked up where he'd left off, selling carpets during the day to pay the bills, but at night, he would haunt local clubs, bars, and venues, sometimes playing with small bands, sometimes just hanging out to absorb the vibe. It was at one of these clubs, High-Low Club, where he met Max Crook, a brilliant but eccentric keyboard player who had invented a quirky early synthesizer called the Musitron. That instrument was unlike anything most Midwestern folks had ever heard. Its sounds were spacey and haunting, almost futuristic. Charles became fascinated by the potential of weaving the Musitron's eerie tones into the rockabilly-influenced chords he was already tinkering with. Together they formed the Big Little Show Band, performing late-night gigs that injected a fresh jolt of electricity into the local music scene. Audience members would do a double take when Max would rip into a solo, those weird, otherworldly notes swirling around Charles's gravelly baritone. The pairing might have seemed odd, a standard rock setup alongside a homemade synthesizer, yet it had an uncanny power. Soon enough, word spread of this group that played in the small clubs around Battle Creek. Charles's big break came in 1960 when Big Top Records signed him. By that time, he'd adopted the stage name Del Shannon, partly because it sounded punchier, partly because it promised a certain mystique he felt was missing from Charles Westover. Once signed, Del and Max quickly got to work, refining a new track called Runaway. It had chord progressions that shifted in surprising ways and a falsetto in the chorus that gave the tune a sense of barely contained anguish. But the secret sauce was the musitron break, a swirling melodic line so captivating that it could almost make your hair stand on end. When the single dropped in early 1961, it took off like a rocket, soaring to the top of the Billboard Hot 100 and staying there for 4 weeks. Nobody had quite heard anything like it. It sold over 1 million copies, and suddenly, the name Del Shannon was recognized across the country. Radio DJs blasted it day and night. Teenagers memorized every word, and for a moment, that wailing falsetto defined the sound of heartbreak for an entire generation. Hats off to Larry, his follow-up single, hit number 5 in 1961. Although it didn't eclipse Runaway, it did prove Del was no fluke. His unique marriage of rockabilly grit with a surprising emotional vulnerability stood out in a crowded field of early 60s pop. Even the Beatles felt the impact. John Lennon was apparently so intrigued by the chord structure of Runaway that it influenced the composition of I'll Be Back. Del's approach to songwriting, minor chords, moody transitions, and that willingness to stretch his vocal range left its imprint on the nascent British invasion. While many American artists found themselves overshadowed by the sudden onslaught of British bands in the mid-60s, Del was actually well received in the UK. He racked up more hits. So Long Baby, Little Town Flirt, Keep Searchin', We'll Follow the Sun. Each displayed a gritty undercurrent that felt authentic. His voice was tinged with heartbreak, but there was always a sense of urgency, of pushing forward. British fans embraced him, partly because he didn't sound like a manufactured teen idol. He had this emotional edge, something a bit darker and more intense than standard bubblegum pop. His popularity soared overseas, leading him to share stages with the Beatles at the Royal Albert Hall in 1963. Whenever he toured the UK, the audiences went wild for that signature falsetto and the distinctive chord choices he threw into his songs. Del wasn't just a performer, he had a knack for spotting and nurturing talent. In 1964, he produced Bob Seger's first demos, helping guide Sager toward a contract with Cameo Records. Later, Del would write I Go to Pieces, which the British duo Peter and Gordon turned into a hit in 1965. Each of these moves reflected Del's broader role in the music world. He was a connector and a mentor, someone who never stopped thinking about how to cultivate the next wave of creative voices. On stage, he gave everything he had. Off stage, he was quietly shaping careers. Even so, Del's fortunes began to wane in the mid-1960s when the so-called British invasion, led by the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and others, surged. The industry had seemingly turned the page on the type of early 60s rock Del was known for. Searching for a new foothold, he signed with Liberty Records in 1966. Although he tried to claw back to the top, the charts weren't as welcoming. The Big Hurt eked out a position at number 94, a far cry from the dizzying heights of Runaway. The collapse of interest in American rockabilly, coupled with the unstoppable momentum of new British acts, forced Del to think more about how to keep his career afloat. Around 1967, he recorded an album called Home and Away with Andrew Loog Oldham, a producer best known for his work with the Rolling Stones. The project was meant to fuse Del's style with a fresh sonic palette, possibly bridging the gap to a new era in pop. But for reasons not entirely clear, the label shelved it until 1978, leaving Del in a state of limbo. Without strong label support, he found himself drifting through the late 60s, unsure of whether his prime had passed. He shifted focus to producing for other artists. One of his successes in that arena was producing Smith's Baby, It's You, which reached number 5 in 1969. Another was Brian Hyland's Gypsy Woman, a 1970 release that peaked at number 1. Third, Del seemed to have an uncanny ear for what might resonate with a mainstream audience, even if he couldn't always replicate that success for himself during this period. In 1972, he signed with United Artists and soon released Live in England, 1973, a record that showcased his ability to replicate the fervor of his classic hits in a live setting. Critics found the album a testament to his authentic musicianship. He wasn't faking anything. If you listen to Runaway on that live recording, you'd catch that same raw vulnerability he'd offered a decade earlier. Meanwhile, Del was branching out in other business avenues. In 1975, he founded Bug Music to secure royalties for artists, starting with a stable of compositions that would eventually balloon to 250,000 titles by 2011. At a time when many musicians focus solely on touring or recording, Del grasped the importance of publishing rights. He wanted to protect what he had built, both creatively and financially, ensuring that artists like himself wouldn't be swindled out of fair compensation. Despite these savvy moves, Del's personal life was veering into turbulence. He had married his high school sweetheart, Shirley Nash, in 1957. They had 3 children, Craig, Kiera, and Jody, and for a long stretch, that family life provided a sense of stability and warmth. The couple relocated to Van Nuys, California, in 1965, likely chasing opportunities in the epicenter of the music industry. But the rigors of touring, the stress of chasing hits, and Del's own internal battles tested their bond. By the 1970s, Del had also lost his father, Bert, a blow that deepened his resolve to make the most of his success, but also intensified the emotional burdens he was carrying. He bought a home for his mother in California, wanting to keep her close, a sign of how family-oriented he remained. At the same time, he was fast descending into an alcohol problem that had been brewing for years. Being on the road exacerbated his loneliness. He started taking uppers and downers, hoping to maintain some semblance of equilibrium amid the chaos of show business. It became a cyclical trap. The pressures of performing drove him to substances, and the substances often pushed him into deeper despair. In 1978, he reached a turning point, joining Alcoholics Anonymous. That year marked a substantial shift. He quit drinking, dropping weight, and apparently finding a renewed focus. Freed from the grip of alcohol, Del plunged back into creativity. The early 1980s held promise, and he capitalized on it by collaborating with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers for an album titled Drop Down and Get Me, 1981. The single Sea of Love climbed to number 1. 33, a modest but noteworthy success in an era when many of his contemporaries had long vanished from the charts. That little surge represented a flicker of the old magic, the sign of a resurgence that Del was determined to nurture. Around 1986, fans of the television series Crime Story heard an updated version of Runaway featuring Del's still urgent vocals. The tune had been reworked to fit the show's gritty, noir-ish atmosphere, and it served as a reminder that Del Shannon was more than just a relic of the early 60s. He had the capacity to adapt, to tweak his hits without tarnishing their essence. Despite the sense of nostalgia attached to Runaway, the new version felt distinctly modern, matching the show's moody aesthetic. It was as if Del were telling the world, "I'm still here, and I can still deliver." That same decade, rumors began circulating that Del might be asked to join the Traveling Wilburys, a supergroup composed of George Harrison, Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, Jeff Lynne, and, until his death, Roy Orbison. When Orbison passed away suddenly in 1988, the speculation was that Dell could fill the vacancy. While it was never confirmed, even the possibility placed him on a pedestal of artistic respect among the industry's elite. These were the kind of rumors that, true or not, spoke volumes about his reputation within the music community. If the likes of Harrison, Dylan, Petty, and Lynn deemed him worthy, that alone served as a validation of his creative stature. In his personal life, however, there was heartbreak. In 1986, after almost 30 years of marriage, he and Shirley divorced. The split rattled him deeply. According to his manager Dan Bourgeois, the divorce left Dell more prone to depressive episodes. Despite remarrying in 1987, this time to Bonnie Tyson, who was also known as Leanne, the shadows never fully lifted. Dell's life seemed to be a contradiction. Professionally, he was inching toward new triumphs, but privately, he was battling old demons. By the close of the 1980s, he and Jeff Lynne were collaborating once more, this time on an album that would be called Rock On. Tom Petty was also involved, contributing to sessions that felt like a bridge between Dell's vintage sound and the contemporary rock production Lynne was mastering at the time. There was a sense that Dell was on the cusp of yet another reinvention, perhaps something that could finally secure his legacy for a new generation. But even the brightest creative surge couldn't stop the dark clouds gathering in his mind. He had struggled with depression for years, and these struggles intensified after the divorce from Shirley. The fatigue, the blue funks, as Bourgeois would call them, weighed heavily on him. He had witnessed 2 suicides in his lifetime, one on a Welsh beach in 1969, another in a desert near his home sometime in the 1970s. Those images haunted him, compounding his existing anxieties. Even after he sobered up from alcohol, the underlying emotional issues persisted. By January 1990, he was desperate for a way out of the psychic pain, so he began taking Prozac. It was a new medication on the scene, widely hailed as a miracle drug for depression. Then on February 8, 1990, he was found dead in his Santa Clarita home, a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. He was only 55 years old. No note was discovered, no explanation left behind, just the grim circumstances. It sent shockwaves through the music world. How could a man who had just been working on fresh material with Jeff Lynne and Tom Petty, arguably primed for a renaissance, choose to end his life? Grief mingled with confusion. His widow Leanne filed a suit against Eli Lilly, the maker of Prozac, claiming the drug had triggered or exacerbated suicidal tendencies. Although the suit was eventually dropped, it raised urgent questions about SSRIs and their potential side effects. Friends, family, and longtime fans were left with the harrowing task of piecing together the final puzzle of Dell's life. The meltdown of his first marriage, the bleak memories of witnessing suicides, the decades-long struggle with depression, and the uncertainties of a music business that often chews people up and spits them out. Any combination of these factors could have contributed. And in the end, none of them fully explained the tragedy, but they cast it in a heartbreaking light. Del Shannon, the small-town Michigan boy who soared to the top of the charts with Runaway, had been searching for something all along, a sense of peace or belonging that he couldn't quite grasp. His ashes were scattered, leaving no gravesite for fans to visit. But the tributes arrived in force. The traveling Wilburys paid homage by covering Runaway in 1990, a gesture that both honored Del and underscored what a colossal track Runaway truly was in rock's pantheon. 9 years later, in 1999, Del was inducted posthumously into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, cementing his place among the legends. Even if he had never recorded another note beyond Runaway, he probably would have still earned that spot, but his entire catalog showed he was more than a one-hit wonder. He had range, he had vision, he had soul. That same year, or maybe the one after, Coopersville began hosting the Del Shannon Car Show, an event that soon became an annual pilgrimage for fans, car enthusiasts, and hometown folks alike. Classic cars line up, radios blaring the distinct falsetto of Runaway as people admire polished hoods and fresh paint. Scholarships in Del's name are awarded, continuing his legacy in a tangible way that supports the next generation. For local kids, he's not just a name from the past. He's living proof that someone from a tiny Michigan town can leave a significant imprint on the global music stage. That's the legacy he leaves behind. Not a neat package narrative, but a messy, beautiful testament to what happens when raw talent, unwavering passion, and human frailty collide. There's something profound in the idea that even as we mourn the manner in which he left this world, we can celebrate the luminous gifts he shared while he was here. Even after all these decades, people are still drawn to that boy from Coopersville who became Del Shannon, searching in his songs for something they too might be missing. And in that search, they discover not only the heartbreak of a runaway, but also the spark of creativity and resilience that defined him, echoing in every note he sang and every chord he struck.